edition of the Energy Week podcast. Ryan Ray alongside Globe Traveler, Bloomberg analyst, columnist. No, you're an analyst, I guess you are. Media extraordinaire, Dr. Energy herself, Ellen-Wald. Ellen, how's it going today?
Everything is fantastic, and we are coming to you from the Jersey Shore. And no, I have not seen the situation. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you clearly don't watch nearly enough reality TV.
We're not talking about the drone strike. Yourself. Yeah, you're not talking about the situation in Yemen and Saudi Arabia.
That is a situation that we will be discussing.
That will be on today's show.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, let's get into the show, I suppose. Ellen, let's start with CNBC. Saudi Arabia is dramatically changing its oil exports to China and the U.S. This was an interesting piece because, you know, I've heard, offline at least, a mixed bag of signals over what folks think the Saudis and the U.S. relationship is now under the Trump administration and under the post-shale revolution industry as well. But it's kind of hard to, I mean, you say, okay, hey, the Saudis are changing it, but there's a lot of factors at stake here on why the Saudis might be changing their exports. Apart from the article, I'm curious your general thoughts on why you think this might be going on.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question, especially considering the fact that I very nearly got into an online Twitter fight with someone over this because the Saudis definitely have an ever-evolving, let's put it that way, political relationship with the United States. When it comes to oil, the relationship really, it doesn't flow over. The political tensions don't really flow over into the oil relationship. I think for the United States, it's, at times it hasn't been that way, but, there's no reason to suspect that there's absolutely no reason why Saudi Arabia has been decreasing the amount of oil that it's sending to the United States. And that's been happening pretty steadily, and it's definitely picked up. This article shows some really interesting data about how Saudi oil exports to the U.S. have been decreasing, and that Saudi Arabia has also been increasing its exports to China. And what's kind of interesting about that is some people think that that's a result of some kind of political or diplomatic tension with the United States. And I don't see that at all. And I almost got into a fight online about this, but I decided to leave it be. But I'll give you my argument now. So what we saw, what this data says to me is that Saudi Arabia has a pretty secure relationship with the United States. It owns the largest refinery in the United States. If it wants to send more oil there, it can. Motiva is not going to say no. They're not going to say to their owners, no, we will not take your oil. We would rather buy oil from Iraq instead. I mean, come on, they're not going to tell Aramco they're not going to buy their oil. So they have a very secure customer relationship. But in China, what they've been doing is basically taking the market share that Iran used to have and sending oil to China and increasing the amount of oil that they've been sending to China to kind of fill in that gap. And one of the reasons I assume that Aramco wants to do this is to secure new customers, because eventually that oil from Iran will come back. But if Aramco has been satisfying this customer needs, it's a very stable, reliable supplier of oil. China may not be induced to return to Iranian supplies, which can be are not always the most reliable. And so in order for Aramco to keep within its production quota, so they don't want to increase production or increase exports, but they've also got to satisfy demand in Saudi Arabia, which goes up in the summer. They've basically been pulling from their supply to the U.S., which is a very smart decision, because they're not going to lose the U.S. as a customer. It's not like, Motiva is going to say, sorry, we're now, we have a good relationship with Nigeria. So Aramco can always fall back on that relationship that it has with the United States. Whereas with China, they're really working to secure new customers. So that's how I see it. I really don't see it as any kind of reflection of politics here. I don't think that there's really any politics involved in this relationship.
for new listeners, Elle and I met on a show called the Global Energy Leaders Podcast I used to do a few years back, and I had on someone from Tongji University there, Wolf Richter, I believe was his name, or Dr. Richter. Anyways, one of the things he told me at the time was that the Chinese, this is back whenever it was, 2016 or whatever it was, I don't remember now, but the Chinese at the time were buying up oil to raise 2017. Anyways, the prices were low. They were requiring as much oil as they could to put it in the storage for, because they buy it cheap and use it when the prices went up or whatever the case may be. This article, the folks at Tanker Trackers kind of allude to that as well, as that might be going on here. How much do you think that is that kind of where we might see the Chinese start to go to if prices continue to fall, to go back to that strategy of absorbing barrels because it's cheap, and then prices shoot up to $70, $80, $90 a barrel, they don't have to pay that premium?
This is a huge question that people want to know. Is China going to continue buying lots and lots of oil and sticking it in storage? There's been a lot of talk about all of this Iranian oil that's in bonded storage in China, which means that it hasn't quite cleared customs, but they could decide, hey, we want to access all that oil. And the idea is that there's so much of it there that could potentially rock the oil market. I'm not convinced that that's going to happen, but I do think it is a concern to keep in mind, because at some point China's going to stop building new storage facilities and they're going to stop buying quite so much. I do think though that quite a bit of China's big oil purchases that they kept up had to do with the fact that a lot of those small refineries were doing a lot of business. And if those refineries stop doing a lot of business, or the Chinese government just decides to cut their quota, then that can also have an effect on prices, or on demand. And that demand might be the first to go in as we see Chinese growth slow.
Right. Yeah, and of course you got this big trade war who's up in there. And I remember when the trade war started, obviously the Chinese buying from the U.S., is basically gone or nil now. But someone at the time theorized that really China had all the light sweet crude they wanted. They didn't want any more, and that wasn't really a result of the trade war. I am interested to follow that narrative, assuming they ever get a deal done, is what happens to China post-trade war. Do they come back and start buying large volumes of U.S. Crude, or are they going to keep buying the heavier stuff from their international partners?
Oh yeah, that's a huge issue. And also the LNG, because apparently, they really wanted that LNG, and those contracts are not moving through. And it will be interesting to see. My sense is that even if they don't return to the U.S. for big shipments of light sweet crude, that if growth picks up and those small refineries want, they'll take from whoever. And if they want that light sweet crude, the United States is available to supply it, they'll probably take it from them.
The only really problem I have with this piece is it has, quote, Aramco is willing to increase or decrease the U.S. To the U.S. based on its own needs, says ellen-wald, president of Transversal Consulting and author of Book Saudi Inc. It doesn't say Dr. Energy. If they're going to quote you, they need to get your title right. I mean, CNBC claims to be an established publication. It's pretty much bush league.
Their style guide says they can't do that. I asked. But
well, they need to get the program here.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay, let's turn now to Russia. Trump's. No. Oh, good Lord. I didn't even think about this till I read it out loud. I can see how this could go if it gets to the mainstream. Trump's oil sanctions leave Russian exporters $1 billion richer. Rachel Maddow might leave with this story tonight.
You got to read the whole. You got to see why they're saying this. Okay, this is like you had to do some serious gymnastics to get.
Oh,
here. Okay.
I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying that. But you could just see like.
Oh yeah.
Puppet of Putin, Russian. You can just see this being a headline somewhere.
Oh yeah. So apparently, okay. His sanctions against Iran and Venezuela inadvertently increased demand for urals-crude, for the Russian brand of crude. And it does say inadvertently. Although I have a feeling Rachel Maddow would probably leave the inadvertently out. But that since we're right-wing propagandists.
We are right-wing propagandists.
We'll leave inadvertently in.
We'll actually go a little further. What choice did the man have?
Yeah.
Yahoo Finance.
Yeah. It's actually a Bloomberg article. So,
well, Yahoo Finance is paying for Bloomberg's articles. Double
yeah.
propaganda there.
Oh yeah. So the sanctions led to this jump for urals-crude. I think I don't know. Urals is like a heavy crude, right?
Mm-hmm. It's according to Wikipedia, for what that's worth, it's a mix of heavy sour oil in the
Okay.
Volga region.
All right.
With light Western Siberian oil. Okay.
So that statement could be made about any country that makes heavy sour crude. But it does say so there was a Russian crude used to be averaging $1 cheaper than the benchmark in Mediterranean and $1.69 cheaper than Northwest Europe. But that discount shrank last November after Trump restricted global purchases of Iranian oil. And since the beginning of 2019, the Urals discount to Brent in Northwest Europe has regularly turned into a premium of as much as, hold your breath, 86 cents per barrel.
Well, okay. So let's put on our right-wing propaganda hat for a second here, because this article is completely missing it. And we're going to put on our MAGA hats, and we're going to tell this article what's really going on. Trump, not only did he get the sanctions on the Iranians, at the same time, he increased Russian oil demand, which then exposed their nasty, dirty oil to the marketplace, which then turned European partners against them, which will ultimately allow the U.S. to sell more barrels of everything to anyone at any time. See, it's so easy, Ellen. I don't know how the mainstream can't get this.
I know that's a much better, explanation of what's going on here.
And Trump would definitely take the credit for that too. You can see him coming out being like, "I knew the oil was terrible, and so I wanted to expose everyone to it. They've got bad oil. You need our oil. Our oil is great."
Oh yeah, exactly. So the big question is whether these $1 billion that Russian oil exporters have made as a result of Trump's sanctions, will this translate into more Facebook ads in the next election?
Ooh, you know what? That's he should have thought of that, about that before he did all this. God, Donald. Golly.
Well, but we know that Facebook is pro. That the Russian ads on Facebook were pro-Trump, I think it was. Maybe I'm missing part of the story. So, he's just funneling. This is really, this is a campaign finance violation, because he's clearly just doing this to funnel money to the Russians so that they can, hack into our election system and make more Facebook ads.
See, I can't tell. Either A, he's so brilliant, he caused the Russians dirty oil to get on the market and he exposed them, or B, he's getting campaign finance violations. It's really a fine line here of what's going on.
I think we just take off our MAGA hats. I think they're restricting the flow of blood to our brains. Maybe then we can actually figure this out.
Can we just say, though, in all seriousness, it's articles like these that drive me crazy. Obviously, so first off, maybe Trump knew this would do this or not, but there's
absolutely no way. I'm sorry. Well, come on. You really think he sits around being like looking at different brands of oil?
I'm talking in like the hypothetical world, like maybe, like it's theoretically possible. But the reality is that he made a decision and this was the law of unintended consequences. And that's what happens when governments make decisions, because they're not into the markets. They just do things and like, oh, this sounds great. And then this happens. And then some writer writes a piece like this. And then you're like, oh, wow. So that to me, that's why I was joking about the exposing of the bad, dirty Russian oil, because it's like, that's how you could write the same piece and say, well, Russia, he actually knew what he was doing. And then therefore, he was trying to expose the dirty oil so that Americans would buy more crude. So it's days like this, I think people just like they have like a quota of blogs or whatever this is, and they just have to write it. They just have to write something. And so there it is. So, Ellen, before we move on, does this put any pressure on Trump to do a deal with Iran?
I don't think so.
Until Maddow leaves with the article.
Yeah.
Does it put any
I'm
pressure
really
on
surprised that this didn't get more traction. Maybe it's a result of it being the middle of August.
Yeah. Well,
everyone's kind of tapped out, or it could be because it's been low.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not really a great talking point right now because the price is so low. Okay, let's go to, I guess it's Reuters via CNBC. Oil rises 0.7%. A whopping 0.7% as Wall Street rebounds, but weak OPEC outlook caps the gains. Oil crude settled up 40 cents, Ellen. 40 cents.
Yeah.
You get richer on that rebound.
I know. This is such a huge thing. It's because it's like the only time it went up. So yeah. I like this quote. OPEC killed the golden goose. What does that mean?
Way to go.
Futures at Mizuho in New York. What does it mean that
OPEC.
OPEC killed the golden goose? Can kill a golden goose? Like if it's actually made out of gold. Oh no, the golden goose is the one that lays
the golden eggs.
The goose that lays the golden eggs. Why would you kill the golden goose? But OPEC didn't do it. OPEC can't do anything. I don't know why people think that OPEC would be effective. I mean, how much oil do you think OPEC would have to cut to actually make a difference in this market?
Well, yeah, a lot. And, you know, I was talking to someone the other day about this. I don't know if I told you about this. I was talking to an economist about, you know, the price crash back a few years ago and OPEC and Saudi. And, you know, one of the things he pointed out, he goes, wow, if you're OPEC or if you're the Saudis and you see the market start to collapse and you realize that if you cut production, you know, you might lose market space. Whereas these American companies might just go out of business and you can gain market space. It's, you know, it's not illogical for them to do some of the things that they do, whether you agree with the business model that they're employing. And it's like, I mean, I know we said before, but it feels like we're still sitting here with these old paradigms in which we talk about the market, whereas you have a lot of pressure right now on the U.S. side of things to cut the rigs, keep cutting. I think we're down almost 20-something rigs, according to Drilling Info, 30 rigs, whatever it is, since July. So the rigs are going to keep falling, it appears, here in the States. So what can OPEC do? I don't know, because even if they said they're going to do something, would the markets actually believe them?
Exactly. I mean, look, I've been people do. I think you're right. They're stuck in this old paradigm where, you know, something happens in the market, OPEC responds, and everything gets stabilized. And I just don't think that's not true anymore. It's also not. It's not in the interest of OPEC countries to do something like this, because say they cut, say Saudi Arabia cuts 1 million barrels of production. They're not necessarily just losing market share. They're also losing a lot of money, because they're not going to push the price up that much that it makes up for the loss of those 1 million barrels that they could be selling, right? So say they cut 1 million barrels and it pushes the price up $5. If they were selling those 1 million barrels, they'd be making so much more money. You know, right. So it's like it doesn't make sense for them to do. It makes much more sense for them to just keep selling their oil, you know, retain their customers and wait it out.
No, I agree completely. I don't know. And it feels like this argument is, if you say that, it's almost kind of like the anti-American argument. You're like, you're anti-American. It's not really. It's just, you know, and I was explaining to someone the other day, I said, you know, if I was a business, or in my business, it wouldn't work like this, but in my business, theoretically, if I had the ability to keep running at a certain level, and doing that would put my competitors out of business where I could buy them or absorb their market share, I might do it, because if that's, you know, if I got the capital to do those things, I might do it. And that's, you know, if a company here in the U.S. were to do those things, we'd go, oh, wow, that was pretty shrewd. They doubled down when things were tough, and they persevered. And so,
oh yeah. And now they're in a really good shape, and you wish you would have invested in them when they were low, right?
Right. And it's hard. And I understand part of this is because it hits home, because we have people that work in the industry, and it's, you know, they may get laid off and stuff. So I'm very sympathetic to that side of things. But just from a pure, how you would think about business, or, you know, how you do something like this, it's not, I don't think what they're doing in this case is unethical. However, killing the golden goose, that is too far. Like, that's, how dare they? I know. I hate these metaphors. Like, who's the golden goose in this situation? You know, but media love them. They love when you give them like a short, zippy little metaphor. Even I'm going to start like making up metaphors, you know, that actually mean nothing, and just see if like I can get them printed. I hope none of the like reporters who usually call me for quotes are listening, because that would ruin my plan. I'm going to say like. OPEC has freed the Falcon, or something like that. Oh my God! You should say that. They would run with it. They would just run with it.
Saudi Arabia has cut loose the bindings on the giant, or something. Like I'm gonna just say these like random metaphors and let them see if they can figure out which is the oil market, what's the U.S. and yeah.
Freed the Falcon. And that would actually work on a lot of levels because they have that falcon hunting over there. So like they'd be like, okay, who's the falcon? Who's the holder of the falcon? And who's the lamb the falcon's eating? Oh yeah, I like that. That's really good.
Oh yeah. See, and double points if it's got some kind of appropriate cultural desert type reference.
Yeah, you got to figure that out. Wow, but. Even though OPEC's in the desert, they have freed the Falcon. No one would ever know what that meant, but they would be like, "Oh my God, that's deep.
Yeah.
That is real deep."
Look for that, guys.
Okay, let's turn.
If a listener spots me getting that in print, maybe we'll send them the Amazon gift card.
Okay, the rules are you can't use it in your own Forbes or investing.com piece. You got to be quoted
I have
somewhere.
to get someone else to quote me.
Yeah, you got to get quoted. Free the Falcon. That's just too funny. That's just too much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bonus points if it's like a nationally, like if it's on the front cover of the Wall Street Journal or something.
Oh, gracious. Oh, that's your next book.
Axios.
That's your next book. This the Aramco IPO 2021, freeing the Falcon, or something like that.
All right, we crack ourselves up.
Okay.
Let's talk about rocket and drone attacks.
Yeah, rocket and drone attacks against Saudi Arabia are a nuisance, but strategically irrelevant, according to senior contributor to Forbes, ellen-wald, Dr. Energy, as I like to call her. Ellen, I saw some talk about this, and there's an article on someone shared on LinkedIn. I meant to go read it. I didn't get a chance this morning, and it alluded that this was kind of the death knell of this whole deal was this rocket and drone stuff from the weekend, but you say it's irrelevant?
Yemen freed the Falcon. No.
Freed the Falcon.
So I read something also, like they made it sound like a huge deal. Okay, it is a drone. It is an important Saudi oil facility. However, let's go back through a lot of these attacks, right? So there was drone attacks on a pipeline in Saudi Arabia that caused a small fire, but no lasting damage, and maybe disrupted the flow of oil for like 10 minutes while they put the fire out. Okay. So no significant outage there. And nothing to the Jazan refinery that they keep shooting rockets at. And they started another small fire. So on the grand scheme of things, they've basically done nothing to harm Saudi oil infrastructure, or to disrupt, the flow of oil, to really disrupt anything. And the market definitely, I think the market understands this, because we haven't seen, also it was a Saturday. So if they want to push up the price of oil, doing it on a Saturday is not like guys, you got to do it on like a Monday or Tuesday.
Monday morning, man, get the thing fired up.
Yeah. I mean, come on, you could if you really want to move markets, Houthis, like Monday morning.
Yeah.
Come on.
You're killing the Golden Goose by doing it on Saturday. Free the Falcon on Monday. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So they're a nuisance, clearly. I'm sure that if you work at Sheba, it's pretty freaky, right? But also, okay, let's think about how in the world are they getting there? So apparently the other attack that happened did not come from Yemen. They think it actually came from Iraq. Sheba is out in the middle of freaking nowhere. It's in the middle of the empty quarter near the UAE. So I heard apparently a lot of sides oh, well, it was Qatar. It was Qatar that did it. Guys, Qatar is a boogeyman. That doesn't mean that the boogeyman actually does the things that you want to blame on him. So I just think that it's strategically irrelevant. And so some people are saying on Twitter, they're like, this is it's anyone do people think this is really scary? And someone's like, yeah, this is, it hasn't done any damage yet, but it's, a signal that things are heating up and Iran's not satisfied with the status quo and it could get worse. I think that people who see it like that aren't really taking into account, they don't really understand Saudi oil infrastructure and how incredibly, how much redundancy is built into this. Apparently in the 90s, the US government did a study of what kind of attack it would take to actually take out like Saudi, oil and the flow of Saudi oil. And they found that there's so much redundancy that they built into this because they pride themselves so much on being a reliable delivery, that really Saudi oil facilities were not especially vulnerable to terrorism at all. But the biggest vulnerability in Saudi Arabia was actually supply of fresh water to Riyadh.
And would that be because their pipelines have a lot of valves along them, or come to think of,
I don't know the specifics.
Okay. No,
I don't know the specifics, and I didn't
Sure.
see the study. I just talked to the guy who basically did the study when he was working for the government in Saudi Arabia. So I don't know the specifics of it. I think it has to do with that, and also with the security that they have there. Obviously, in the 90s, they weren't taking into account a drone attack.
Right.
But it just doesn't seem that these rebels, whoever's sending these drones, really has the capability to do serious damage. I mean, like, you need like an army of drones.
Well, yeah, and the reason I was asking that, because obviously for pipeline security, mainline valves is the more of those you have, obviously the more expensive the project gets. But the closer they are, then the less oil you can lose for during a explosion, blowout, or drone strike in that case. So that's why I was just curious what they're, because you wouldn't over here we have a lot of regulation over where the valves got to go and stuff like that. So depending on which governing body's regulating them, but over there they don't really have those. So I as you mentioned that, I was like, I wonder how they handle their mainline valves, because it's probably a little bit different business model.
Well, if we have any listeners who are well versed in Aramco's pipeline valve placement,
yeah, if you could send a KMZ of all those, we'd appreciate the KMZ.
Yeah. So, because I know Aramco generally, they kind of self-regulate. I mean, in the United States, that'd be considered like, licensed to just like dump everything everywhere.
Right.
But they do a lot of self-regulation, and they probably put their valves or whatnot in the place that they think is the best for, I don't know, optimization or whatever. But yeah, we'd love to get some information on that. So if any of the listeners want to dial in, send us an email.
Yeah, AndrewPodcast.com or LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever. And like I said, a KMZ would be, it'd be pretty cool to have a KMZ, but I'm not holding my breath for the KMZ of the mainline valves. Well, we do, Ellen, that's all the articles we had today, because we had a guest, but he is not going to be able to make it. So we're going to have
we can talk about some other things.
Well, go ahead. What you got?
Oh, well, so I thought so. Well, I had got a bunch of interesting questions for our mystery guest, who will hopefully come on some other time. But I thought we'd talk about what is going on with the oil market today, because the stock market is back up, and I was hoping that they look at like what's going on in the oil market today, as well as oil. I honestly have not been quite keeping up down here at the Jersey Shore. Time moves a little differently, but let's see how things are going, because my kind of sense is that oil is really moving. Yeah, and oil's up. WTI is up 2.15% today, which kind of corresponds with how the stock market is doing, which is why I think that none of these attacks. They'll say oil up because of attack over the weekend, but also the Dow's up 200 points. So you can't say that oil is just up because of that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know, because it's funny, because if you look at this from the U.S. side thing, without the global, which I know you can't do, but just from what the news you're hearing in the Permian especially is, it just feels like there is a lot of pressure right now on these oil and gas companies to cut spending, cut rigs, which should obviously at some point lower the production of the U.S. markets. But we covered a story today that said that from somewhere, I can't remember who I couldn't remember who the person was, but they said that they're expecting record production by September, I think it was. And so, if that's true, then you're like, oh, wow, so the market's going to go up. So hold on one second.
What about gasoline demand? So this is a question I'd love to kind of get a baseline on. So we've been, every time we look at these monthly statistical reports from API, like gasoline demand, really strong gasoline demand in the United States. And yet people are now starting to talk about the fact that they believe that gasoline is either going to be flat or fall off for the rest of the year. And I have a really hard time getting behind these predictions. And I know that seasonally gasoline demand is going to fall off, but that when they say really strong gasoline demand, they're always saying it's very strong within, seasonal variation compared to the same time in previous years. But I just find it really hard to get behind these forecasts when we've seen gasoline demand defy expectations all summer long. I was just saying that I'm seeing chatter and forecasts that gasoline demand is going to either kind of fall off or it's going to kind of stagnate for the rest of 2019. And it's interesting that we see these predictions considering the fact that the API monthly statistical reports have consistently shown that gasoline demand has been much stronger, both than predicted or expected, but has been very, very strong. And I do understand that seasonal variations, take that into account, but we're looking at gasoline demand based on where it was in previous year, at the same time previous years. Do you think we'll get a surprise in gasoline demand that it will continue to stay strong throughout the rest of 2019, even as, say, diesel demand growth drops off?
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm still stunned by last week when we had on Dr. Foreman, and he said that July was the the highest demand since 2005, and for me it's always hard to balance what's in the news versus what the actual numbers are saying, and you're like, okay, well, the numbers are saying this, and then the news is saying that it's all over, and so and then sometimes those numbers are actually going to be adjusted in a few months. So I don't know is my answer, and I'm torn because there's part of me that wonders. If you look at the stock market last week, and it kind of dived, took a dive, and I think I don't know if it's back up to where it was or not, but slightly rebound. Part of me wonders if Trump is going to push these China negotiations forward sooner, assuming he does have all the chips he says he has, and what impact that will have, because it feels like, and I think I saw on Twitter the other day, I think maybe you're on this or not, but someone said, how much of the recession talk is people talking about the recessions? And I've wondered that as well, like how much is just from people just talking about it, because the numbers from Dr. Foreman seem to indicate that, at least not across the board, but in some areas that, hey, we're actually doing pretty good. But then every day it's like, okay, this is the problem. And there's an article this morning, maybe it was in the Journal, I can't remember where, and it kind of had an indicator that maybe that there's, I can't remember what it was. There's something that wasn't being bought at the normal scale. So I don't know how to balance all these confluence of events.
RVs,
yes, that's what it was. I didn't get to read the article, but I saw that. Yeah. Okay,
so I just saw that. So that's so interesting. So yeah, RV. So why? So apparently, demand for RVs is down 20% this year, but last year was also down 4%. Okay, so is falling demand for RVs a sign of recession, or is it a sign that, oh my God, people do not want to spend 4 weeks in the summer cooped up in a tiny car with the rest of their family?
So the thing that I would like to know on the RV thing is, and this is why it could be interesting, is what percentage of RVs are actually sold to workers versus vacationers? Because if you go to like the Permian or, back when the Bakken was going up, there are a ton of those things out there. So,
oh, that's a really good point. I did not think of that. Oh, that is really smart.
So if it's a high percentage of workers that buy them, and then you're starting to see them fall, well, then it could be a bigger indicator. If it's vacationers, then so I don't know the breakdown, and so that's why I'm always curious. But it could be an interesting indicator.
Well, I think that along with what's the API indicator that we're always talking about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can't
the diesel something.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
The distillate something. We should keep our eye on the RV sale indicator.
And maybe Dr. Foreman, I know he listens. Maybe he will have that answer for us. But I saw the article and I wondered about stuff like that before. Is that it's the API distillate economic indicator. But yeah, I don't know because. But yeah, so anyways, so if we got an RV dealer, I'm curious. We need like a national perspective. Obviously, if you're in Kentucky, it's probably mainly vacationers. But from a national perspective, what percentage of RV sales are actually going to people working on projects versus travelers?
If there's like a massive hurricane that displays doesn't like the FEMA buy tons of RVs, like give to people for temporary housing, that could totally change RV demand. I mean, where I live, there are a lot of RVs.
Right. And I live in an older demographic county in Texas, and there's a lot of them here, a lot of parks and stuff. But when we put some guys up in North Dakota, you talk about the FEMA trailers. The hotels were so expensive that some guy from South Louisiana actually had bought a bunch of FEMA trailers, took them up to North Dakota, bought some land or rented some land or whatever, and he put them out there. So he'd actually bought them from FEMA. And so you're right. That is something that they buy. I think they're kind of the more of the generic models, but yeah, they do buy them on some level. So that could impact that as well. Anything else before we got out here? We haven't had a Tesla update. I had someone the other day mention something about Tesla. Anything else before we get out of here today?
I don't know, but I saw one the other day on this island at the lone charging station. So someone drove their Tesla down here. What about so there was what was the interesting thing that I was thinking about Tesla? I can't remember right now, but I do have something interesting to say, but I'm going to save it for next week.
Save it for next week. Okay. Speaking of next week, let's kind of talk about that. We got this show this week, the 26th. We'll be off on Labor Day the 2nd, and we'll be back on the 9th regular schedule for, it looks like a bunch of Mondays in a row there as it stands right now. Ellen, between now and next Monday, where will you be?
Let's see. I'm going to be on investing.com and Forbes, and I'm on a show called PRI The World, which I believe is broadcast on public radio. So I'm going to put on my left-wing hat.
Oh, wow. Do they know you're a right-wing propagandist? Oh, you're like the counter view. That's what it is. You're there to bring balance to it.
I'm actually the expert on the oil tankers. So it's neither here nor there. But I do have a Bernie Sanders hat I could put on if it made people feel better. and I do believe you have a Russian hat somewhere as well that you could put on. Oh my gosh, has a Russian hat? I do. I have a Soviet hat. I try to keep that for winter time. But
okay,
yeah,
so
that's
you can
my
play whatever.
Hat.
Yeah, whatever role you need to be. You can go from freedom fighter, capitalist, all the way to full on commie. You've got range. Okay, Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, Oil and Gas Contractors Connect. This show, obviously, and bring in the closers. I will be at NAPE if you're listening. I'll be at NAPE this week, so hit me up on LinkedIn and be down there Wednesday and Thursday. So for any listeners who might be at NAPE, would love to meet up with you. Ellen, anything else before we get out of here today?
I think that's it. Everyone have a wonderful week.
All right. Yep. And we'll talk to you next week.